Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools, and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being, and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being.
Welcome to the 226th episode of the award-winning Diverse Minds podcast. And on today's episode, I'm going to be giving you a roundup of 2023 and the reflections from the year. So the end of the Gregorian calendar is often a time for reflection for people in the global north, and it's an opportunity to look back and set the tone for the year ahead. I think it's a really useful exercise to celebrate all you've achieved and consider what you want to build on. This has been my sixth full year of business, and it's been an unexpected one. So at the start of the year, I set a word to set a tone for the year ahead, and the word for this year was ease. And after last year, and if you want to hear more, please do listen to episode 174, 2022, the year in review, my year of abundance, ? I did feel really low, and I talked a lot in this episode about grief. So this year, I'm really pleased to say that I didn't cry every single day like I did in 2022. So that for me is a massive result. But going back to the word ease, I wanted to focus on the Mandarin words or the concept, the Wu Wei, the Taoist tradition concept of doing nothing, or as yoga teacher Mimi Kuo Dima talks about, balancing effort and ease. And I think that's super important. This whole idea of how we can still make effort, but we don't have to drive ourselves to a point where it feels exhausting, and also feeling that ease and flow as we're doing something. And thinking about the concept of choosing a word for the year, it's very interesting because Coach Jenny Garrett and founder of the Diverse Coaching Directory, which I'm part of. If you want to know more about Jenny's work, please check out episode 91, Elevating Teen Self-Esteem. She talks about a word for the year taking on a life of its own, and I would say it really does. So you do have to choose your word a bit carefully. But why ease is because I felt like I needed some reprieve from the grief and the challenges of 2022. And for me, it was, like I said, it was about not pushing into resistance, trying, but knowing my edges and where I don't have control, and that's okay. So in essence, stepping back and saying, you know what, it's okay. This is also salient for anyone who is a recovering, incessant planner like me. So I used to love planning, organizing for weeks in advance, have every weekend booked up, buy theatre tickets, buy concert tickets. And since the pandemic, I've really had to change my perspectives and way of living on this, especially with train strikes, things getting cancelled, and just roll with the punches more. And things do happen, they just happen in a different way. So I really hope you're enjoying the content of this podcast and you want to keep up to date. Then why not join my bi-monthly newsletter? When you join my mailing list, you'll receive a free copy of my white paper on inclusive language and mental health at work. And that link is bit.ly/ILMHCK. Okay, so I'm going to go through month by month, giving you a little overview of what happens and the snippets and the highlights. So January kicked off actually very excitingly because I got a place on Hatch Enterprises Accelerator Program, and that was all online with some brilliant entrepreneurs. So that started. I was doing at the University of Sheffield anti-racism training, and I also did my collage as a coaching tool training part 1. And there's an episode with the wonderful Andrea Watts coming up in January as part of the Heart and Mind Connection. So she talks more about the tool and what and the programs and trainings that she runs. And I always start with the social media stats for you at the beginning of the year. And I actually track them each month, but I'm not going to give you the stats each month because I don't think that will be very interesting for you. But LinkedIn started off at 5,308 followers, Twitter at 1,929, Facebook likes 506, Facebook follows 543, and my email list was at 1,169. The theme for the podcast, well, we kicked off with Dan Ram talking about diversity and inclusion in presenters and speaking. And my episode with Maya Kalaria, we had a very deep and powerful conversation. In fact, that is the one most popular episode on Spotify of my podcast. Maya is an incredible person, so do go and check out that episode 175. And then for the rest of the month, we talked about poverty and mental health, episodes 177 and 178 with JC Perkins from the US and Erin Norton-Brown from Minds. February was for me delivering sessions on cultural awareness, and Northeast London Foundation NHS Trust did some training on neurodivergence and neurodiversity. I was on the Mark Smith's The Process in the US, his radio show, talking about kind of what process means to me. I was able to go and see the interactive Frida Kahlo exhibition at the Real Store in Coventry, and I'm really glad I did because sadly the Real Store is no more. And it was also the first time I got to go to the Hepworth Museum, so that was great. And the theme for the podcast was LGBTQ plus intersectionality, and those are episodes 180 to 183. Then in March, I did a keynote talk for the wonderful Women in SEO conference, so Arij Abu Ali, and I talked about standing in your confidence. The Association of Higher Education University Administrators launched their reciprocal mentoring program, which I was really pleased to facilitate, race reciprocal mentoring. I attended the She Awards and met the wonderful Shoma Ghosh, and we've been talking and working together for years in the flesh. And I won, thanks to her who put me forward, who nominated me. I got the highly commended in the inspirational role model category. I also was able to visit a friend in Brighton, which was really lovely, straight after the SEO conference, and decided to do a visualizing birdsong and art workshop. So that was really lovely. And completed 100 Happy Days. So incidentally, I started doing that on the 22nd of November, 2022, and completed 100 days from the 22nd of November takes you to the 1st of March. And if you want to know more about the journey, I documented it on Instagram. It's episode 186 if you want to know more about the process and the results. And the theme for the podcast was International Women's Month and doing things differently. The other thing about this year is I spent a lot of time doing significant amounts of personal development. So in April, I started the Positive Intelligence course, Shazad Shameen's course for coaches, specifically for coaches, and that required a lot of time. So doing daily exercises, a weekly webinar, reflections with a kind of peer coaching group. So that took up a lot of time. I did an Alzheimer's Society as a Q&A on stress for their team. And I also listened to the audiobook Radical Acceptance by Tara Brach, which is a phenomenal book that really helped with this kind of concept of ease and acceptance, which is something I think if many of you are planners and you like to have control is not necessarily first nature to us. So that book is really brilliant, and it is based on a Buddhist philosophy, but you could take it with the Buddhist philosophy, without a philosophy, and actually apply it to your belief system, whether it's a religious belief system or a philosophical belief system or any kind of spiritual or non-spiritual belief system. So that was really great. And the theme for the podcast was inclusion mistakes, and that's episodes 188 to 191. In May, I ran an inclusive language masterclass with the brilliant Emily Horton, More Diverse Voices. So do check out her work. I did mental health keynotes because, of course, it is Mental Health Awareness Week. I had a lovely reunion with some friends I don't get to see very often because they live in different parts of the world. And it was especially lovely to see a close friend after her father had passed. So do listen to episode 201 on friendship and mental health to learn more about that. And something very exciting for me was a lifetime goal of seeing puffins, and I got to see the puffins in Northumberland on a boat because you can't go on the islands, the sub-islands at the moment due to the risk of avian flu, but it's absolutely phenomenal. And not just puffins, actually. There were some auks and some razorbills, and that was very exciting. And the theme for the podcast, coincidentally, is climate change, chaos, anxiety, connection with mental health, episodes 193 to 196. And really eye-opening episodes for me because I had guests from Kenya, Irene Asua, and also the wonderful Jelly May Moring, who lives in the UK, but her heritage is Filipino. She was born and raised in the Philippines, and talking about the impacts on countries we don't always get a sense of in the news or get to hear from. So really great. And actually thinking about the puffins, there is a connection, of course, there's a connection with climate change and chaos and injustice because of sand eel fishing and habitats that ruin areas for puffins to feed. So that was incidental, but I think seeing them, if you've ever seen them, it's a really special thing to do. In June, I did cultural awareness sessions and leadership communication training. I also became a trustee of the wonderful Serendipity, Black Arts and Cultural Heritage Organization. And the theme for the podcast was a mixed bag. We had an episode on personal branding and then men's health, but particularly, with different elements. So I spoke to Mark Smith about transformational versus transactional, Nana Parry about failing forward, and the 200th episode celebration with the wonderful Dr. Jonathan Ashong Lamptey. And he was the person who encouraged me to start a podcast. So to be podcasting for over 4 years in this area is actually quite a rarity. You might not think it, but do check out those episodes 197 to 200. And I also had to get really into gardening because I do have quite a big garden. And I finally sorted out it sounds bizarre, doesn't it? I can't even believe I'm saying this really, but my raised beds, and had to literally get my garden in order. July, the work again was on cultural awareness and leadership programs. And I was, as a member of University of Leeds Council, I nominated and got to go to Anita Rani's honorary graduation and meet her. And that was a real pleasure. And I also got to go to one of the first gigs that Nitin Sawhney did for his new album, Identity. And if anyone is a Nitin Sawhney fan, if you've loved him, I mean, most Asian Brits, we love him because of what he has done, and his music. And there were so many songs that there were just tears rolling down my face because it was so moving and poignant. And I've listened to his music for over 20 years. The theme for the podcast, we kind of had two. We started with friendships and mental health. So the episode I mentioned, and also the authors of the book You Are Always Mine, Christine Pride and Joe Piazza, was really lovely talking about intersectional friendships. So do check out that episode. It's 202. And then August is always a quiet one, but of course it is South Asian Heritage Month. So doing talks for South Asian Heritage Month for a number of organizations. I also did a mini MBA, and that was a whole week, and that was really interesting. Great to meet colleagues in all different fields, looking at different aspects of running a business. The theme for the podcast was telling your story in line with South Asian History Month, and do check out those episodes 203 to 207. I also met some associates in the flesh. So the wonderful Monica Mwanje, and she was on podcast episode 40, was negotiating something better with Michelle Gima, and the wonderful Shazne Spencer. And I went to, and the reason I could meet them in the flesh is because I went to the Liverpool Biennial, which was such a great experience. And this year's theme for the biennial, it's every other year, but this year the theme was Umoya, the sacred return of lost things. So about repatriation, returning things, and so many pieces on race equity, and blackness and black power from global artists. Really brilliant. And from there I went to Anglesey to see a friend. I'd never been to Anglesey before, was absolutely struck by its beauty. Such a lovely place to go, highly recommend. And also very interesting because Anglesey is Welsh first, to be in the UK and hear Welsh being spoken. So I think it's great. And it also made me consider why on earth, if we are from the UK, do we not, especially in England, do we not have an option to learn Welsh at school? Or why do none of us really in England, unless we have Welsh heritage and parentage, know basic Welsh? So that, again, these things are always eye-openers, aren't they? September was mental health training, so the mentally healthy leading professional training, and collage for coaching sessions on an away day for Attenborough Arts. And also the Association for Higher Education University Administrators Race Reciprocal Mentoring Check-in. I also launched my inclusive language white paper, so the one I mentioned, if you join my mailing list, you'll get a copy. You'll get a copy of that, and it is inclusive language and mental health in the workplace. I managed to take a 7-day break to Scotland, which is kind of an annual trip, which was great. And the theme for the podcast was writing and mental health. So do check out episodes 210 to 213. I talk about why writing and mental health in the first one. I speak to the wonderful Jackie Holder about connection, nature, and mental health and journaling. Greta Solomon about journaling, and Jim Hall, who's been my writing teacher for a few years, talking about creative writing and mental health. October, more sessions on cultural awareness. And I also, thank goodness it wasn't a huge month because I got COVID. So I hadn't had COVID before because I'd not really been going anywhere. But of course, October is Black History Month, and hold me back from Black History Month events because it is a highlight of the year for me. But of course, when you haven't been going out for a while and then you start going out, the chance of getting COVID is increased. So I had COVID. I wouldn't recommend it. And if you listen to last year's episode, I talk about taking part in the clinical trial, which I'm really glad I did. But I definitely had this other variant they're talking about because I had a rash on my neck. Anyway, the thing is, it's very, very boring being sick like that. So, and quarantining away in your own home. So yeah, it wasn't great. But I did manage to get to Annabelle Shoemimo's book launch, one of her final book launches, author of Divided, and do check out episode 24. So I'm so lucky I got her then, because she is incredibly busy now, where we talk about sex, people of color, and mental health. I got to see the wonderful poet John Agard perform. And of course, there was some horrific global news around the attack on Gaza and Palestine, and joining Jewish Voice for Peace calls on pushing for a ceasefire. And those calls are still going. So if you're interested and you want to join, they are focused on the US, but really helpful to know the kind of more the picture in the US and what's going on. And people from all over the world join the calls, and we're still having those calls to call for a permanent ceasefire and solution. And the theme for the podcast was Saluting Our Sisters, with some great guests. So it was a really great Black History Month theme, episodes 214 to 218. Then in November, I was working on a disability entrepreneurship research project, and also carried out facilitated conversation for an organization who want to improve communication with different team members across various organizations. It was a project team. And the theme for the podcast was parenting with equity and wellbeing in mind. And this has been a really popular series. So I did an intro, and then I had 3 guests. So the wonderful Dr. Keon West talking about racism in parenting. I had Dr. Naomi Irvine talking about wellbeing in parenting, and Carolina Albuerne Rodriguez talking about cross-cultural parenting. So people have loved this, whether they're parents or not. It's been a really, really popular episode. And I also, carrying on my gardening theme, went to a Royal Horticultural Society, RHS, Bridgewater workshop on gardening in winter to know what to do, because I'm still a novice, and it was brilliant, really, really great. And if you haven't been to RHS Bridgewater, it's stunning in the autumn because of the way they've planted it to bring out in certain areas of the garden really beautiful autumnal colours. So that was lovely, and really lucky to get it on a sunny autumnal day, despite the fact that it's Manchester and it often rains. So really, really lucky. Then December, it's all about wrapping up the disability research project. And the other thing I did this year in terms of personal development was taking part in an unlearning circle based on Layla Saad's book, Me and White Supremacy. So we did a mixed group. We had 2 white members and 2 South Asian members. And actually we had very similar backgrounds in terms of, what I'm going to say, don't you, slices of South Asian culture. And 3 of us in the group met up. And unfortunately, one couldn't make it to kind of close off the circle. We'd been doing it for a year, working through the book in chapters, sending each other voice notes. And it was a really interesting experience. And if you do want to know more, do check out Layla Saad's book, where she talks about using the book as a tool in community. And also the wonderful Diversity Power Awards 2023-24. I'm really pleased to have been listed as on the Diversity Power list 2023-2024. So that happened at the beginning of December. Unfortunately, I couldn't attend the actual ceremony because of train strikes, but I was able to go to the afternoon tea in November and meet members there. So that was really lovely. And I took part in a writing workshop for global majority women over the age of 41 or 41 and over. Women Speak Volumes, and that was really, really great. So that started in November, closed in December, and we had a little final gathering. And the theme for the podcast, so this has been kind of a mixed one. We had 2 episodes on disability, one with the wonderful Toby Milden talking about inclusive architecture, me summarizing kind of the barriers that disabled entrepreneurs face, workplace wellbeing trends, and then, of course, the wrap-up episode. So then if we round up the stats, we've got LinkedIn is now on 6,195 followers. So that's an increase of 887. Twitter, 2,078. That's an increase of 149, which I hadn't really realized because Twitter does seem a bit stagnant. Facebook likes increased by 11 to 517, and Facebook follows to 567, increased by 21. I mean, Facebook's an interesting one, and I know that people aren't really on there to look at the content I provide. It's much more about individual experience. And the mailing list has grown by 93 to 1262. And of course, it fluctuates because people come in and out. And then according to Spotify, there is 1,000 minutes of new content across the episodes this year, and 19% increase in people following the podcast on Spotify. So not across the board, but so huge thank you to everyone who's listened, commented, shared, liked. I know that the other bit of information Spotify gave me is that most of you are sharing episodes on WhatsApp. So that's really, really good to hear. And so for 2024, my word of the year is going to be magical. And as much as I would love actual magic, I really would. If anyone's a fan of the original Bewitched series from the 1960s, I always wish, God, I wish I could do those things that she does in the program. But it will be about finding magic in the mundane and everyday moments. So, I will recognize and acknowledge that the year of ease has been sort of a mixed bag, but it's about not pushing into resistance and not pushing hard. So I can't say that, I've set goals and I've smashed them, because I haven't. And that's not what this year has been about. And while I don't think it's been the most exciting, that's okay. It's been a time of learning and processing and giving myself space, which I really haven't been able to do before. And it's also realizing how easy I do have it in the global picture and trying to make a difference. So this season and into 2024, I wish you much ease, peace, and joy. And I'd also really love to know and hear from you, what are the lessons that you feel you've learned this year? And you can work with me going forward for training, coaching, speaking, and consultancy. And here's to a very happy, healthy, and positive year ahead for you. And please don't forget, you can leave me an anonymous voice note on SpeakPipe, speakpipe.com/diverse minds, and let me know if anything I've spoken about resonates with you. And please, leave me a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast from, and do share and like. And do join me in 2024 as we kick off podcast series about heart and mind connection. So thank you again. As always, it's been a privilege to have this time, to know that there are listeners out there. I love hearing from you. And here's to a positive 2024, and do take care of yourself. Until then, bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.